And so, hello, students. I hope you're having a good week to start the week. The professor's comments today, as I'm doing them, are a little different. I wanted to put a face to this whole thing. Of course, um, many of you students have seen my picture in the Canvas shell. More and more, I just want to make sure you realize that there is a human being behind this whole madness. As you work to be successful in the class, there's going to be situations where you're frustrated with the learning modality. There's going to be situations where you're frustrated with the professor. And there'll be situations where you're frustrated with yourself. And of course, we haven't even considered the frustrations that are impending in terms of life and this COVID-19 and what they call it COVID SARS 2, I believe is the official name. A form of SARS, but I digress. So I wanted to do the video today just to let you know that, as you're sending emails to me it's great. I mean, continue to communicate with me when you need to. I'd like to hold office hours. Today is Labor Day, so I'm not going to do office hours today, but starting next Monday, I'll hold office hours and give students the opportunity to link in with me in a Zoom meeting. I'm not a big fan of Zoom for this purpose, but yet I will give you instructions as to how to use the Canvas shell here to set up, Zoom conferences. And I will also discuss how, when you come to the Zoom conferences, it's going to be one-on-one, and it is required that if you sign up for a 15-minute Zoom, that you actually spend 14 minutes, or you and I will spend 14 minutes together, because if we go over the 15 minutes, then there's a domino effect where it impacts everybody that's waiting on the Zoom. It just throws everything off. I'll kick that around or really think about that in terms of what might be the optimum way to do that. Because in the past when I've done that, it's been very frustrating. If I went over just by 1 minute, 20 other students could be impacted, and it could really bring about a significant frustration on both parts, the instructor and the students. But my point is that I wanted today, the professor's comments are just to talk about a couple of elements. First and foremost, it's vital, of course, that students are, if you're in the remote learning modality, or if you're in the online modality or learning mode, that you complete your assignments, right? And so I want to give support through this video to say that I realize that all things aren't equal. Right now is really, really challenging. But with that being said, we've all signed up to do certain things, right? We've all signed up to be as successful as we can during these challenging times. One of the things that I'm noticing, and maybe more in my remote class than I am in my other classes, in my online classes, is that my students aren't completing the work in the required time frame. And one of the impacts of that is that, and I shouldn't theorize, I should say, well, commonly, if you don't complete work in the first week, then it's going to probably impact the amount of success you have in the second week, third week, and fourth week in terms of engagement, in terms of energy, in terms of motivation. And then the further you get behind, a student gets behind, then the more likely that it's going to impact your overall success. Now, again, this is not a statement. This is not an indictment on anyone. That's why I want to show my face as I discuss this. This is just a supportive discussion to say that I feel your pain if you're out there and you're saying, well, I don't like going online and taking a quiz. I don't like not having my professor in front of me. that I can hear him or her, watch them do notes, discuss, and more importantly, feel a part of the academic ecosystem in terms of an infrastructure, in terms of a room. But we don't have that. So I get that in a lot of cases with this data that you can see here, that in my remote class, of the 18 students that have enrolled, 8 of the 18 have completed the homework thus far. Now, in this case, this is my Tuesday class, and so I have a situation where they still have some time to get that work done. The lecture interactives, though, these are the free thing. These items you are not awarded points for, even though as you're doing your lecture interactives in your class in the My Econ Lab, it says 10 points. Well, those are removed at the end, right? So though you can't bank on those points. A lot of students will do the lecture interactives. They'll take 10 seconds to click through the lecture interactives to earn the 10 points. But truly, the 10 points are only there. It's just like a holding value that anytime I assign something in My Econ Lab, it has to have points attributions to it. But I say all that to say that if you're doing the lecture interactives, please take time to go through them. Don't just speed through them, because the points you're earning there don't matter anyway, right? So I don't want you to feel as if you're getting something for nothing there. But those lecture interactives are very powerful. I mean, they are tools that I believe that if you go through them with due diligence, it's going to impact your ability to do things. And then in this particular class, the homework, you'll notice only 11 of the 18 people have completed the homework. Again, these students have another day. So if you're watching this video today, and if you're in this class here, the 76573, I'm hoping you're seeing this and going, all right, I've got to do my homework, right? Because I talked to this with my wife and colleagues because I was concerned. And they said, well, you know what? The students in the remote class, it's different for them. Like, they may not have the online, what you might call, attitude, where they're realizing that it's a requirement that you do homework, like every day. But with that being said, it does say here on this page that I have a 92% average on the Chapter 1 quiz, but only 6 of the 18 students in this class have actually completed the quiz. Now, on the one hand, 92% looks great. But on the other hand, this is far below half of the students that have actually completed the quiz. Okay. So keep in mind that it's hugely important that you students embody this process as if you were literally going to class every Tuesday, Thursday, or moreover, that there's a requirement. This is almost like a job, and I hate to put it that way, because you go, well, I'm not earning anything, but you really are. You're earning knowledge. You're learning. You're gaining intellectual capital. So like in this case, this is my online class. 10 people of the 20 have taken the quiz, and this is due later on today. It's 87% average. That's pretty high. Homework, 12 of 20. That's over 50%. The Get Started quizzes, 14 of 20, and that's something that I allow students to do multiple times. Lecture interactives, 16 of 20 students have done them. That's great. And then the Getting Started homework, 16 of 20. So the numbers are different for the online classes than they are for the remote classes. And the point I want to make in this professor's comment is that they shouldn't be. We should have the same success or number of individuals completing the assignments shouldn't be below 50% at all. So I really want to encourage you to be mindful of that, because again, in this modality, the margin for error is larger, right? Because you're in an online situation where you can't talk to your professor and tell him, hey, I had a bad day. Well, I mean, that wouldn't necessarily change his or her decision to allow you to do a homework assignment that you didn't complete, but yet at least it would give you that ability to get it off your chest, right? Okay, so the focus for this week is on trade-offs. And again, one of the key elements with this part of economics is the fact that now we're looking at, we've decided and we've ascertained that, people work at margin, right? That each decision that is made is one that is made incrementally. Two, that individuals in and of itself, or in of themselves, are incentivized in a lot of cases to do certain things. So there's incentives behind it. And then thirdly, as we make this economic, these choices within our world, there's a cost and benefit analysis that's always interplaying. Like if you make a decision to stay up late and binge on Netflix, then there's a impact on your ability to be prepared for work, or more importantly, in these times, prepared to help your child learn online if you binge on Netflix. So it's important to understand that trade-offs, that's the term that we use in economics. A trade-off basically says that any decision that you make has an alternative reaction, like there's something alternatively that is also being measured. So the trade-off for reading has two pieces. Well, one, as you're reading, you're giving up time to do something else. Maybe leisure, maybe spending time with family. However, when you compare and you say, well, which is most important? In some cases, reading might be more important. So think of that trade-off as the other thing that you could do if you weren't doing a activity. And then we'll measure that trade-off in a couple of ways, right? So the term comparative advantage then is now aligned with trade-offs to say, well, let's measure the trade-off. We considered it earlier when we said, well, and I'll use the case where you might say, you go to a Labor Day gathering, and you choose to have more beers than you might normally have because you say, oh boy, luckily I'm around people now. Wow, everybody is social distancing here. We have masks, but I'm going to have a couple of brews more than I would normally have. So the benefit is that, yeah, you're feeling a little tipsy. The trade-off, though, is that you're not going to be able to drive home. Or if you drive home, you could be putting your life and others' lives in jeopardy because you might be a little bit inebriated. Okay, so the trade-off then in this case is related to the decision, but it's the alternate impact. Okay, so then comparative advantage is going to be, how do we measure that? How do we put a number on the trade-off? Right? So keep in mind, comparative advantage is the cost of what you give up compared to the cost divided by the cost of what you gain. So there's a ratio. What you give up is on the top, and what you gain is on the bottom. So for example, when we talk about the comparative advantage of doing something, you have to give up 50 items to gain 100 items. Or moreover, let's just say like we have to give up 4 hours to get 2 widgets. So the comparative advantage is 2, right? Because if you give up 4 on the top and you get 2, then 2 goes into 4 twice. And so the comparative advantage number is actually 2. Now that's important because if you're thinking about activity A and you say, okay, my comparative advantage is I have to give up 2 items over here, when you compare that to an alternate thing, you're going to be comparing the 2 comparative advantages values, and the situation where the comparative advantage is the lowest, that is the decision that you're going to make. That's the thing that you're going to actually do. And I'll talk more about this. You'll be able to see this in the graph here momentarily. Okay, so trade-offs, comparative advantage, and then the impacts on the market system. So the way we identify trade-offs in economics is that we actually look at in the beginning stages is we develop what we call a production possibility frontier, also synonymous with the production possibility curve. And I shouldn't say that the two are synonymous because truly they aren't. A production possibility frontier, we'll show later, is a sloped line that is linear. But a production possibility curve is curvilinear. And so the mathematical properties of a production possibility frontier and those properties related to a curve, well, we can still determine the rise over the run or the decline over run, but with the frontier, the slope is going to be constant. However, with the production possibility curve, the slope is not constant. Okay, thus there's 2 different reads, right? If I ask, and as you read the chapter, the production possibility curve is more realistic because what it's saying is if you do more of one thing, typically you have to give up increasing numbers of the other thing that you're not doing. For example, if you read, the more hours you read, the greater amount of time you can't spend maybe playing video games. Marginally, that is. So hour for hour, you read more, you give up maybe 75, you give up a certain amount of time playing the video game. So we'll have, this graph that'll look something like that. Oh, I know that's a bad rendition. We'll show it here in a moment. So let's stay on focus, Henry. Production possibility frontier compared to production possibility curve. Comparative advantage and trade and how that's important in our society to determine, because when we think about in America, what do we do best? Well, we make films really well. We have our music and our athletes are just amazing. Our education system is top. I'm not going to say it is the top. We do produce some really good cars. We produce furniture well. And I'm just off the top of my head. So as a society, there's a number of different things that we do well. But now when we look at what China does well, wow, China does a lot of things well. They produce, innovative computers, in a lot of cases faster than we can. They produce athletic shoes, apparel. Their movies may not be to the same quality. Their athletes may be slightly, their prowess may be different, right? Their ability to produce cars, well, we know they produce cars well. So when we look at those 2 comparisons, then it's important for us to use in economics a comparative advantage table to identify who should trade and or what we should trade. Let's put it that way, not who, but what. What should Americans trade compared to what should we import? So the link to comparative advantage is really aligned with what we might call imports and exports. An export is something that we send to another country. An import is something that we bring in from another country. Now, obviously, these decisions that are being made or this thought process under the production possibility frontier or curve perspective impacts comparative advantage in terms of the value. And then the market system then is thus reactionary to this. What I mean by reactionary is that once we identify, and when I identify the fact that I have a comparative advantage in cutting the grass at my home than my wife. Why? Well, because, maybe, and I don't want to use domestic things because I don't want any of my, I don't want my students to feel like I'm a male chauvinist, so I won't use that analogy, because my wife could probably cut the grass just as equally as well as I could, and maybe even faster because she's younger than I am. Okay, so let's continue on. So scarcity and trade-offs, as we identified in the first chapter, scarcity is the limited availability of things that are required, right? Because individuals want certain things. So there's limits. I must say that I was going to offer an extra credit item on the circular flow model, but I just felt that maybe it was a little too early to be awarding extra credit points. So I do apologize if you were waiting on that. I know one of my students was a little cantankerous. She was like, well, why did you say that? So I'll give you other opportunities for extra credit. But we talked a little bit about the circular flow model, right, in the professor's comments. So the circular flow model looks at the organization of our society, where we have homes on one side, we have firms on the other side, right? And it's like a circle, right? And then we have products on the top side, and then we have resources on the bottom side. So if you think about the circular flow model, it's almost like an orbit where you have homes, firms, products, and resources. Okay. I realized that wasn't a good pictorial as I did it in the space here. But one of the things I dislike about this modality, because of course if you were in my class, I would show you a board and I draw this on a board. So scarcity. Scarcity is a situation in which unlimited wants exceeds the limited resources available to fulfill those wants. And not everything is scarce, right? So I mentioned to you in the first professor's comments, factors of production, land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship ability, and time. Those fundamentally are scarce resources that if you have to do any writings in your discussion board this week and you want to consider, what are the resources that are scarce in our society? Land, labor, capital. Now remember, capital, I shouldn't say remember, but capital has two pieces. It can be either human or it can be physical capital. Right? So you and our intellect provide us to be a human capital element. Right? But then the computers and or the calculators that we use, those are not human. Those are physical capital. Right? Or shall I say technological capital. So land, obviously scarce, because there's only one earth. Labor, well, we can't all be economics professors. Right? We can't all be CIS professors. We can't all be professional athletes. We can't all be lawyers. We can't all be doctors. We can't all be apprentices. We can't all be iron workers. We can't do everything we want. Or shouldn't I say what we want, but there's just such a broad diversity within our society that we all have what we might call things that we're stronger in. Okay? So, in that regard, we're different. And because we're different, that also gives to the, leads to the fact that that uniqueness is what makes us so powerful as a nation. I digress. So scarcity requires trade-offs. Economics teaches us tools to help make trade-offs, good trade-offs. Example is when deciding how to use its scarce workers and machinery. If Tesla wants to produce more Model 3S's, those resources will not be available to produce Model SS's. Now, because remember, as I mentioned, so there's scarce elements: land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship ability, the fourth scarce resource. The ability to start, the heart to start your own business. I'm not saying that these are scarce resources that every economist will come up with, because of course, clean air is scarce. Money is scarce. Safety is scarce today. Health and our ability to get around without masks. I mean, there's a scarcity of our freedom now. But for economics, right now, we're saying that there's four fundamental scarce resources that we're going to remember: land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship ability. And I always add one in there that's not in your book, called time. Time is the fifth scarce element. But keep that in mind. We'll expand on that. So when we think of production possibility frontiers and opportunity costs, the production possibility frontier is a curve. No. Production possibility frontier is not a curve. I'll show you the differences here in a moment. This is an incorrect statement. But we can say that it's a graph showing the maximum attainable combinations of two goods that can be produced with available resources and current technology. Is the PPF a normative or a positive tool? So remember, in chapter 1, you learned that there were two types of economics. There was a positive economics, which is based on fact, and a normative economics, which is based upon value judgments. So it says, hey, it's positive. It shows what is. It doesn't show what should be. So in chapter 1, we discussed, again, the two theoretical ideas of positive economics and normative economics. Normative is what should be. Positive is based on facts. In the truest sense class, this is a production possibility frontier, not a curve, right? Because it's non-curvilinear. However, it is my job as your professor to identify for you the differences between a PPC and a PPF. The point I want to make here is that it says and it shows that Tesla can produce its original models or its new models, right? So original models, we can start at 0 right here at the E and produce 0 of those, or we could produce 80 of the 3 S's, right? Because what this is saying is that because there's a scarcity of time, there's a scarcity of technological know-how, there's a scarcity of individuals that can actually produce these items in the beginning, you know, the how, the what, the for whom questions, that we look at this, and keep in mind too, this is as an academic model. You may say, well, no, Professor Young, we could produce 80 and 80 if we want to, really. I would say, yeah, you're right. But from the beginning, when you're considering doing one thing or the other, you have to juxtapose or compare, what do I have available to produce these items compared to what do I have available to produce these items? And as I mentioned earlier, if you're playing a video game, all of your time is spent playing the video game. You can't read at that time. You can't do both of them at the same time. Now, I know I have some students that can play their video game and read, but I don't know the return is going to be that significant. Okay, so in this case, this is what we call a production possibility table. Right? Now, let's start from the A. You'll notice here that we can either choose, according to this, not we, but this society, can produce 80 of the original models. And if they're doing that, according to this graph, this is what this shows. So at the axis point here, or should I say at this meeting point of the axes, you have an x-axis and a y-axis. And according to this graph, you can produce 80 of these items. If you produce 80 of those, then you can't produce any of the others. That's what makes this point possible. But as you move down the production possibility curve, you'll see that you can give up some of the original models and then produce some of the other items. So in this case, we give up 20 and we gain 20. We'll stay right there. So if we give up 20 on the one axis and we gain 20 on the other axis, the opportunity cost of value is 1. Because you give up 20 and you gain 20. So remember earlier I talked about the fact that it's a ratio. Now that you might say, well, why is that significant? Well, in essence, to produce one of the items, you have to give up one of the other items. And so it's a value that now you could compare to another decision possibility. So producing points on the PPF are attainable for Tesla. Points below the curve are inefficient, right here in the F. And then points above the curve are unattainable in the beginning stages of an economic breakdown of production possibilities related to a country or a person or, moreover, a company in this case. So you'll notice earlier I mentioned to produce 20 more Model 3S's, you have to move from A to B. That's this section here. You have to move down. Now remember, last chapter we talked about the linear equation of the line where we said, well, y is equal to a plus bx. But now what we're seeing here is that if we were to develop a linear equation for this line, it's going to be y is equal to a minus bx, because the minus is the fact that the line is downward sloping. Okay? So 20 fewer original Model S's is the opportunity cost of producing 20 more Model 3s. We combine that. We said, well, if we're giving up 20 and we're gaining 20, our opportunity cost is 1. Now, this is a production possibility frontier. This is a production possibility curve. This is why I wanted to make sure you know the difference. They are truly different, as you can see, in terms of their construction, and more importantly, in what they are, but the model is actually conveying. So these are the important elements of this week. Spend time on the lecture interactives. Spend time reading your chapter, not once, but twice. Okay? Don't attempt your homework until you've actually read the chapter. All right? I would now say, are there any questions? But I'll just go back to our fundamental, the fundamental graph that I think is the most important. Okay, so I hope this gives you some basis for where we're going in this chapter. Again, this is the value, I guess, of having this technology, that you can actually hear your professor's voice and I can go through some things. I do apologize. I'm limited by virtue of my screencast-o-matic times. I think I have 35 minutes max. And I don't want to overtalk. I want to give you an introductory basis as to what you're going to be learning this week. But then now you have to do your part. Now you got to delve into that book. Okay, now you got to really spend some time reading and thinking about some of the things that we've discussed this far. Okay? All right, students, well, have a great week and have a great Labor Day for what it's worth. And again, make sure that you're completing your assignments. It's very important. Thank you for your time.